the interview of Benny. My practice is that every time we have a Thursday Night Live, I like to start with the Dvar Torah. And this is really sort of a Dvar Torah, and as you'll see, it's also an homage. A friend of mine in Montreal, Moise, grew up in the Lebanese city of Tyre. He would tell me that on the Chagim, on the Jewish holidays, the community would only keep one day of Yom Tov because they were living in what Halacha considers to be the land of Israel. And I mention that because when we talk about Syrian and Lebanese Jewry, we need to reflect on a distinguished history that they had, which in large part is shaped by the fact that they were in countries that were either part of Israel or adjacent to Israel. In earlier periods of history, for the Syrian community and the Lebanese community, being Israel adjacent allowed these communities to flourish and bestowed them with a holy status. But in the 1930s, being Israel adjacent meant that the Jews of these countries bore the hatred of the masses who were whipped up in an anti-Zionist frenzy. Ironically, Jews like my friend Moise were at the same time living in a bitter exile while living in the Holy Land. But first, let me offer some highlights of the history of the Jewish community in Syria. Josephus, and this is in the sixth and seventh decade of the first century. This is over 1900 years ago. This is Josephus, of course, lives during the Churban of the second Beit HaMikdash. And Josephus says that the Jews in Syria have a very large community because it's right near Israel. And of course, Damascus, as you know, is 30 miles from the Golan Heights. And we know from other historical sources, certainly from the Mishnah and the Talmud, but even from the New Testament, we know that there was a large Jewish community in Syria and in Damascus during the time of the second Beit HaMikdash. After the Crusades, the Gaonim of Eretz Yisrael took their yeshiva first to Tzur because they left Yerushalayim and they didn't want to be there when the Crusaders were there. And they went up to Tzur, to Tyre, and then they went over to Damascus, where Yeshivat Eretz HaTzvi was open for hundreds of years. And for the Jews in Damascus in the Middle Ages, this was a wonderful place to live. There was a Jewish traveler by the name of Petachia of Regensburg, who went to visit Damascus. He traveled to many communities, and he went to visit the Damascus Jewish community in the late 1100s. And Petachia of Regensburg said that the local Arabs say if there's a Garden of Eden on earth, that is Damascus. And if the Garden of Eden is in heaven, then Damascus is sitting right underneath it on earth. This was a place where people could flourish. It was a beautiful community. And of course, in terms of the Syrian Jewish community, the Aleppo Codex, which actually started out in Tiberia, which is the Rambam considered to be the most accurate wording of the Torah that was available. That was something that was brought to Aleppo in 1375 from Tiberia in a roundabout way, and then ultimately was rescued and taken out in 1958 and was smuggled out. And then, of course, we have to mention that in the 1500s, the Spanish Jews come. And initially, the local Jews and the Spanish Jews, like so many instances, they had separate synagogues for centuries. And then ultimately, the two communities became one. But I just want to mention one other thing, and that is that Syria, in terms of halacha, has a quasi-Eretz Yisrael status. We know from Shmuel Bet that David HaMelech, King David, conquered Syria and made it part of his kingdom. And the Gemara in Gittin says that Syria is like Israel in three ways and like Chutz La'aretz in three ways. And I'm not going to go into all of the detailed situations, but what's fascinating is that when you talk about it being like Israel in three ways, it is that you're obligated in Ma'aser, you're obligated in tithes, and you're obligated in the 7th year, the Shemitah year, the Shvius year. And the other thing is that you're allowed to buy a field in Syria through Amira La'akum on Shabbat. You're allowed to ask a non-Jew to sign the contract for you on Shabbat, as you would be in Israel, because it is still considered to be a somewhat of the mitzvah of Yishuv Haaretz, of settling the land of Israel. And we do allow you to ask a non-Jew to do some labor for you in order to acquire a field in Eretz Yisrael. And the same is true of Syria. Now, what's fascinating is that one of Rabbi Laniado's ancestors, Rabbi Shlomo Raphael Laniado, who began in Aleppo but then became the rabbi of Damascus, Rabbi Shlomo Raphael Laniado was asked, how is it that we don't take Trumot and Maasrot? And his answer, in short, is yes, you do have to take Trumot and Maasrot. One of the reasons that was given that it would be allowed was maybe because the land doesn't belong to the Jews, it really belongs to the king. But his feeling is that you have to take tithes, you have to take Trumot and Maasrot in Syria, just like you would in Eretz Yisrael. And Jews that would have gardens that would produce fruit. So one of the solutions he gives is that you should be mafkir, that you should publicly renounce your ownership of the garden so that the fruit is not obligated in Truma and Maaser. This is a fascinating example of this being really almost part of Eretz Yisrael. And perhaps the one thing that best represents this idea is the Eliyahu Hanabi synagogue, which is also known as the Joe Bar synagogue, which is in the eastern part of Damascus, and unfortunately was destroyed during the Syrian civil war just a couple of years ago. And it was, when it was still standing, the oldest synagogue in the world. And there are still photos and video of the synagogue, and there's a wonderful website called diarna.org where you can see the photos and videos. And Benny may have some photos and videos as well. I know that he has. But this is just to give you a sense of what this place was and its connection to Eretz Yisrael and this ancient Jewish community's connection to Eretz Yisrael. There's a plaque in the synagogue that says, this is the place where Eliyahu anointed Elisha to be his successor. And there's a tradition that there's a cave behind the synagogue where Eliyahu was hiding from Achav, who is the king of the northern kingdom at that time. And there are so many different minhagim that go with that went with the synagogue. People would go on what was called a ziyara, to a pilgrimage, to light candles. If someone was sick, they would put them in a room near the synagogue, or they would take their shirt and put it on Eliyahu's seat. And they would see as a way of bringing healing to the person. This is a community, again, and it needs to be emphasized. It's so tragic that we have lost our connection to this community, that we can't visit it, we can't see it, we can't see these beautiful synagogues, because this, when it was still there, the community in Damascus, the community in Syria was perhaps the oldest remaining community in Chutz La'aretz. And unfortunately, as I mentioned, you can still be in Galut when you're very close to Eretz HaKodesh. You can still be in exile and still be in the Holy Land. When the Damascus Blood Libel in 1840 came out, the Eliyahu Hanabi synagogue, as many others, was ransacked. In the 1930s, when Arab mobs in Israel, or what was then Palestine, started to come out and murder and fight with Jews, the same thing happened in Syria. And in 1949, after the declaration of the State of Israel, the Al-Menashe synagogue was attacked with bombs, and 12 Jews were murdered in that attack. And now, of course, the Eliyahu Hanabi synagogue is not there anymore because of the Syrian civil war. And over the years, this wonderful community, which had such a powerful history, had to leave had to leave Syria. Already in 1945, 1946, the leadership of the Yishuv in Eretz Yisrael understood that we need to get Syrians out of Syria. And in a special rescue in the middle of the night, 1,300 children were smuggled out of Damascus. And then the rescue efforts continued. And for this, we're going to be turning to our discussion with our dear friend, Chazan Beni Zalta. So once again, Chazan, it is an honor to have you here. And I just want to emphasize to everybody who's watching that you are getting a connection with Jewish history that you otherwise would never be able to get a direct connection to. You would read about it in a book, you might watch a video, but here you're going to hear about it directly from Benny. So Benny, welcome, and I'm going to ask Rabbi Laniato to properly introduce you before you start.
Thank you.
I'd just like to echo what Rabbi Steinmetz had said. We did lose Syria as a place of Jewish life through maybe 3,000 years. But what made Syria amazing wasn't the land, but I think it was the historical legacy of scholarship. It was a tremendous scholarship in both Damascus, Aleppo, Qamishli, and other towns within Syria. We have, as you said, Rabbi Steinmetz, a wonderful opportunity of continuing that legacy with Chazan Beni Zalta, who grew up in Syria till the age of 17, 18, was properly trained in their schooling, with their reading, the music, how to study Torah properly, with its values infused within him. Many of us experience this on Shabbat when we come to the Beit Knesset and are so absolutely moved because he's not just a Chazan. We do recognize him for his booming, powerful voice. Cantor Burson, who's here with us right now on the panel, noted to me on Yom Kippurim, he heard your voice through the stairwell and was inspired. But there's so much more. Rabbi Lookstein says he loves praying with KJ Sephardic, specifically because when you pray, it's not just your powerful voice, it's not just your musical knowledge, but it's your knowledge of the text. And Rabbi Lookstein loves your emphasis and interpretation of the tefillah as you pray with your heart every single Shabbat. You've been described, and you've described yourself, not as a Chazan, but as a Shaliach Tzibur. And I remember, I think it was the first Yom Kippurim that I was the rabbi here in the KJ Sephardic Minyan. And I overheard you saying to one of the assistant Chazanim, we're not praying for the congregation. We're praying with the congregation. We're amongst the people. And I was so moved by that. And realized that the way that you lead us is by inspiring us to pray, not by leading us as a cantor, but rather by lifting our own tefillah. That's how many of us know you. But only some are aware that that's not your day job. By day, you're a radiologist, a physician, and an associate professor at Montefiore Medical Center. I think even less know about this early history that Rabbi Steinmetz had mentioned. But the early history of your life within Damascus until the age of 17 and 18, all the wonderful memories that you have shared with some of us, but also the very difficult ones under Hafez al-Assad and his oppressive government, where he limited the movement of Syrian Jews and also set up secret police. I've heard about your story of attempted escape, and then finally in 1986, of actually escaping Syria. I think even less people know about your work with the CRSJ, the Council for the Rescue of Syrian Jewry, where in 92 and 94, you worked amongst them and with them to save about 4,000 Jews and bring them here and settle them in the United States of America. Tonight, we all have the opportunity to learn so much more, not only about your history, but also about the wonderful legacy of Syria, and also the hardships and the beautiful story about the Brooklyn Syrian community supporting those Jews in Syria and bringing 4,000 of them here and settling them, integrating them into the community. Without further ado, I pass it back to our senior rabbi, Rabbi Chaim Steinmetz, to begin the interview.
So excellent, Benny. I think you've been so perfectly introduced. You could be, Now you have to really bring it. People are expecting a lot, but I know you will. I want to just start really for all of us. Describe what your life was like as a child. When you were living in Damascus, what was life like for the Jewish community at that point?
Rabbi, as we spoke before the meeting, I did prepare a short, and that goes through much of the questions that if you give me a few minutes, I'll run through the slides. So if you give me the control over to share the screen with you.
Okay, you can do that. You should have at the bottom, it should say share screen. Can you do that? Because you are a panelist.
Do you see it?
Yes, it's working now. Excellent.
Excellent.
Okay, so I'm going to go quickly. First of all, I am both honored and more so humbled by your introduction, Rabbi Nado and Rabbi Steinmetz, for this wonderful opportunity for me to speak about my personal life and speak about the Jews of Damascus, where I grew up with. I'm going to go through a few slides, maybe 20, 25 slides quickly to give you a background of my life and the place I grew up with, and then we'll go through questions. Okay. This is a satellite picture. Street is called Al Amin, and my house is the second house here, number 2, Al Amin Street, the beginning of the entry of the Jewish quarter. This is a picture of typical Jewish homes in the old, I'm sorry, not Jewish and non-Jewish homes, typical Damascus home architecture, beautiful, beautiful homes. Damascus is the oldest capital in the world, as you guys know or have read. This picture is from 1800. The city is walled, and not like this, much well preserved. These are some of the older town streets in Damascus. This is the Jewish quarter, falls in old Damascus, as this map shows. Really a small area, no more than, I would say, 2 miles square, that housed majority of the people. Bab Tuma, and a picture from one of the Jewish streets. Bab Tuma is just the outskirts of the Jewish quarter, and this is where the blood libel story came out. This is a Christian neighborhood, Christian quarter, that Rabbi Steinmetz mentioned in 1840. Another street from Damascus, old town, ancient. Jewish presence dates back, as Rabbi Steinmetz says, to King David, as was mentioned before. Yoav ben Zeruiah, the general of King David, reached northern Syria and conquered it. 1934, the numbers of Jews lived in Syria about 30,000, and that dwindled only to approximately 5,000 Jews by 1948, many of whom, due to the riots and the change in the environment, felt unsettled and threatened, and they emigrated to all kinds of places, including Israel. From that moment on, from that year until the year 1992, where all the Jews were allowed to leave, the number of Jews in Syria remained static. My family came with everyone in 1992. The community in Syria is a hybrid of many communities and many cultures. Due to its location, it was part of the Silk Road. Many Jews from all around, from Europe, from Africa, from Asia. They all passed through, and the community was in constant influx over the years. And that's where all the influences from other cultures come into it. Typical courtyard, beautiful homes, nice weather. Some Jews were very well-to-do, others were not so well-to-do, and many were very influential. This is a picture of Farhi's house, very famous home in Syria, who was an extremely influential man, pious Jew in Syria at the time in the 1800s, 1840, 1845. This is the entrance to the Jewish quarter. As you can see, the outside, the streets do not really convey the ostentatious grandeur of these homes inside, very inconspicuous doors to enter. The Jewish quarter is in Old Damascus. As I grew up, there was a Secret Service headquarters, Division 293, that is the specialized division in espionage. Very specific division of the Secret Service where they monitored all the Jews 24/7, surveillance, everything. Arbitrary regulations changed on daily basis. Travel restrictions. As I was growing up until the age of 10, 11, I remember quite well that we, my father and I, Shalom, we used to go to the headquarters to get permission so we can go outside the 6 kilometers for a day of, let's say, a vacation day outside. And they had to okay it. No passports for Jews. We were not allowed to own passports. We were not allowed to move. We had ID cards like all the Syrian citizens, except our ID cards had a special big red stamp that says in Arabic, Musawi, from the word Musa or Moshe, which means a Jew, easily identified. In terms of Jewish life, Damascus alone had total of 22 functioning synagogues. Some date back to more than 2,000 years, as Dr. Rabbi Steinmetz mentioned. All Jewish holidays were observed according to halakha, religious practices were permitted, but we were living as hostages. Many of the regulations were imposed upon us. These are some of the synagogues. This is a French synagogue, one of the major synagogues in Damascus. This is the entry to the synagogue that was before the war, of course, in Syria. And here where I come to Jobar, the oldest synagogue. And this is the plaque outside the synagogue. This is part of the door, very inconspicuous. As you can see, since 720 BC, the synagogue had been around. This is the inside of the synagogue before the destruction, vibrant, beautiful ancient synagogue. And this is the plaque, as it says in Hebrew, French, and Arabic. In this particular spot, Eliyahu Nabi anointed Elisha ben Shaphat in the year 3043 from creation, obviously. It's an amazing thing. This is what you read about in Tanakh. This is like a living memory, living history. More of the same, very distinguished structures. They are really lost treasures. In terms of our rabbinical or leaders, a whole host of giants who were our teachers, my ancestors, grandfather, great-grandfather, Hacham Meta, I don't know if you can see my pointer here, was my own teacher, Rabbi Indibo, Hacham Nissim Indibo was, I barely remembered him. He died at a late age, but before I really got to know him very well. And of course, Harav Haim Ben Yosef Vital, who was the student par excellence of Rabbi Rabbeinu Ari Zal. This burial site is the final place. And why do I say that? Because this grave was moved from the original burial site by government ordered because they wanted to create a highway in 1970. My own uncle was involved, who is still alive, involved in this process, which was a very demoralizing experience from what I've heard from him telling us the story. Moving on to my family business. My dad, as many Jews in Syria, worked as artisans and craftsmen, copper engraving and silver inlay, silver and gold inlay. And this is a picture of a friend of the family. I know him, he lives in Brooklyn now. And this is what my dad did. This is the type of work, Judaica type of work. They did Judaica and non-Judaica. For example, this is silver inlay of the story of Noah, as you can see, in the detail. This is a plate, Im Eshkachech Yerushalayim Tishkach Yemini, an ancient place, as you can see all these details. This is another plate, Birchat Tishak LeYaakov, all silver inlay on brass plate. A masterpiece, again, Moshe and Aharon. This type of work was very unique to the Jewish people. I'm not sure why non-Jews did not participate, but the Jews were the suppliers of this type of work, not necessarily Judaica type of work, but without the Hebrew and Judaica, we were the suppliers to the market. Damascus market was well known. Avodat Damascus, as you can read here with a little vase here. Education. We had two schools, one, the Alliance Elementary School, which was for both boys and girls up to the 6th grade, and Moshe Ben Maimun School, where I went up to the 9th grade. After that, I had to go to public school like many other of my friends and be with Jews and non-Jews, majority or non-Jews, obviously Muslim, Christians, and so forth. And that has had its own experiences, as you might imagine. All schools, the Jewish schools, must have additional principal appointed by the government, usually Ba'ath Party member. Hebrew language obviously was not permitted to be taught at no cost, no way. Torah, Tefillah are fine. And that's where we learned our Hebrew, to understand the Torah from an interpretive point of view. It's just translational, and that's how we picked up the biblical Hebrew. There were daily inspections on the list of absentees by the Secret Service every day to the schools because Jews were escaping. This Alliance School currently was originally a house for a famous family, Lisbona family from Spain. A magnificent home. I don't know how many, was converted into a school. As you can see, it was run down, obviously. And these pictures from Jewish schools where we sat, those chairs, benches, we sat and we learned. This is the elementary school. As you can see in the background here on the left lower corner, still some of the ornamental work on the walls of that palace one day held. This picture on the right lower corner shows kids, basically maybe 8th, 9th graders. We had to wear military clothes. That was the culture in Syria. Jews and non-Jews, we were like really taught. My childhood was, as you can imagine, laced with multiple tragedies. And this is one of the greatest tragedies. I'm sure you've heard of the story. That was 1974. I was the little young, but I remember very well what happened. I mean, the whole story. The top two girls and the left lower part, all sisters of the same Zebak family. The right lower one is my aunt, Eva Saad, was 17 years old. These four girls attempted to escape, but were murdered on the way, and their bodies were brought back to the Jewish community. My grandmother had to go and identify the body, and I won't go into details. My grandfather was not able to go. He couldn't handle it. So my grandmother went to identify the body of her daughter. So that's one of the tragedies. At the same time, my uncle, who is my father's brother, Azur, lives in New York now. He was imprisoned, being accused of helping Jews escape Syria. And he was in prison for about almost 2 years, after which he was released. Because of the situation in Syria, Jews had fled continuously, many of whom, my cousins, there's not a single family in Syria that did not attempt to escape. Usually individuals, young, like all of my cousins, the Sayag family, 8 brothers. They escaped one after the other. Sometimes the story ended up well, sometimes did not end up well, like in the case of my aunt here. My other family, I would tell you, as a part of the story, who made it into Israel, a whole family escaped, and they had a baby who's a little over a year old with them on the Turkish borders while they were crossing. I heard the story firsthand from my cousin when I went to visit Israel in 1990. She told me that they were crossing the border and the smugglers who were armed were waiting for the checkpoint exchange, different, what do you call it, different groups. It was like the exchange, I don't know what do you call it exactly, like between 2 groups, the guards, change of guards. And they were waiting for the appropriate moment to cross that little path in the middle of nowhere, and the baby started crying. And they could not really keep the baby quiet no matter what they did. He forced her, he took the baby, but on gunpoint, took the baby, and the baby was buried alive for 10 minutes. She lost her mind. She was in therapy for years. Thank God the baby survived, but that experience really had its impact on the whole family. I'm sure you're gonna ask me, how did I get here? My first attempt failed, and thank God I was not, I didn't end up with the Secret Service, in the Secret Service hands. Things went luckily fine. All of our money were taken, we were allowed back into Syria without any reporting, and very, very few people know about this story. Including
so you got to elaborate, Benny. You're saying it too quickly. So you had to bribe someone in order to be saved?
I'm sorry?
You had to bribe someone so that they didn't report you?
The checkpoint we were held on the Lebanese border side at the time in 1984, as you know, was under the Syrian control, and there were a lot of checkpoints. We were asked the routine question, ID cards for everybody, and when they saw the ID cards, what are you doing here? We had a story where few of us, 7 of us, we had a prepared story for this, and the story was we're going to a place or a small town called Shtura, not far from the border, for shopping for the holidays, shopper clothing. And it was a well-known area to go shopping for all European products and stuff. And we were held for the whole day, interrogated by the station chief, who at the end somehow decided that's what we believe happened. He decided that will let us back and we'll keep all of our possessions. Some of the people with me come from well-to-do families and they brought a lot of cash. And he kept the money and he told us, okay, this truck will take you back to the bus station in the Syrian territory and you go home, and that's it, and wasn't reported. I guess he figured out he would have to report it to the appropriate authorities and channels, which is usually the Secret Service, Mukhabarat. And if he does that, obviously he has to claim everything he owns. So that failed, and nobody know about this story, including my family members. At any rate, I was able to work, which I didn't mention, that silver engraving I learned from my dad. I was working with my dad since I was 8. I'm the oldest of 10. And I worked with him every summer, every vacation. We didn't have any vacations basically, but every summer, every vacation day. And by age of 14, I had my own production. I decided to split from my dad. I had my own work in addition to my school. I was able to work for almost a year and save money, close to an equivalent of $4,000 or $5,000, which I paid for to obtain a passport and get to the United States. I got to the United States with the goal of by myself.
But one second, can I stop you for a second, Benny? So
Yeah.
you were able, how were you able to get a passport? You had to bribe someone, or
Yeah, you had to pay
did they
bribes.
allow Syrian Jews to fly out of the country?
Okay, so the fact that passports at that time in the 80s were permitted or given to single individuals of a family, but under certain conditions and with a lot of bribes. So we found a way and we paid our dues, my dues, and I was allowed to travel on the basis of tourism. I was given the okay to obtain a passport on the basis of tourism. I had to place a bond of 25,000 Syrian pounds in the bank as a collateral for me to come back. And my own father signed a paper guaranteeing my return. He was responsible for me. And he was harassed for years after that, which we knew.
So, in other words, they didn't do, they harassed him, but in other words, they didn't throw him into jail or do anything like that.
No, they did not throw him into jail, luckily, but he was harassed on frequent basis, every month, every other month. And I came to the United States to a friend, to a brother of a friend. I did not know him. He's the one who came to the airport and picked me up, and I stayed with him for almost 2-3 months until I found 2 other people like my situation from Syria, friends, and 3 of us rented an apartment on East 7th Street, Avenue T. And that's how I started my trip in the United States.
So let me just stop you for a second. So your father knew that you were not going to come back.
Correct.
Okay, and he wanted you. You should get out of there, and he wanted you out.
My father, yes, my father encouraged all of us, to pursue education. And he was ready to do. Did you lose me?
No, I got you.
Oh, you lost.
We hear you. We hear you.
Okay, so for my own benefit, for my own future, he really sacrificed everything for all of us. And for me personally, to let me go. I'm the oldest he was counting on. but to pursue my future, he was okay with that. And to be honest, on the night before I left, no, 2 days before I left, it was happened to be Rosh Hashanah. Before that, he came to me and he says, Ben, how much money left in your pocket? And I said, I have a little bit. So he realized that I don't have any much money left. And the night before leaving, he came to me and he said, this is $600. And I found out that he borrowed the money from my cousin to give it to me. And that's what I came with here.
Wow. And that's how you were able to eat the first day you got here.
Right.
So tell us about the CRSJ. You have the slide up. So let's hear a little bit about how that got started and what you did.
So it's a very fascinating story. I will make it short. I was a third year college student at YU, Yeshiva University, in my dorm in Lubin. For those who are familiar with with YU, I received a phone call from someone who identified himself as Moshe Barnea. Moshe Barnea was a journalist working for Yediot Aharonot, and he said, my name is so-and-so, and I heard that you came from Syria not long ago, and I want to talk to you. Can you come to the lobby? I came down to the lobby, I spoke to the man. He told me, listen, I have been in journalism for many years. I know about the Jews of Syria, and I don't understand why don't we do something about rescuing the Syrian Jews. And when he spoke to the community in Brooklyn, they told him, if we make too much fuss and a lot of PR about the issue, the situation will become worse on the Jews. So they kept it quiet. But he believed otherwise, and he said, we have to do something. Can you help me? I said, absolutely. And the first meeting he organized at the Sephardic Center in Brooklyn, a gathering in the evening to inform of the plight of the Syrian Jews, and I spoke there. In that night, there were hundreds of people. That was the seed for the CRSJ, were few enthusiastic, good people who approached me and they said, let's do something professionally. And we did. More professional people came and an organization was born. And we named it as CRSJ. CRSJ was a small organization without much experience in the circles of Washington and lobbying. We hired a professional man. I think he's a KJ member, Gilman.
Who?
Gilman.
Gilman. I don't know.
I'm blanking on his name because I haven't seen him for many years. He was the director, and all Jewish organizations. You see my screen, right?
Yeah. They're telling me it's Gil. Was it Gil Khan?
Gil Khan, sorry. Yes, Gil Khan.
So he comes to shul every Shabbos still.
Yes, so, yes. Gil Khan. He was a full-time director, and I have to say that all Jewish organizations, every single one of them, was instrumental, really, in helping CRSJ getting to Washington, opening doors, and hammering all these politicians about the Syrian Jews. And the major changes that happened in the 1990s, I don't know if you guys remember, shift of power imbalance in the world. Russian empire collapsed. Syria was attempting to get closer to the West and had a whole list of demands from the American administration at the time. And the American administration was faced with Iraq War, 1990, remember? So there was mutual interests, and this was the point, the turning point, where CRSJ really broke out full force lobbying everywhere and in every direction. This is a picture of some of the members. Marcus Zalta, Albert Harari, Alice Harari was the president, myself, and Moynihan, a congressman from Ohio, was very instrumental. Farm Fair Committee. Charlie Cohen in the background. And this is the full committee at the time, CRSJ, all those people. Alice Harari was a full-time lawyer. She quit her job and dedicated literally 5 years of her life, day and night, to unpaid volunteering work for the rescue Syrian Jews. And I have to tell you, this is a picture from a rally we did in Washington, Freedom for the Syrian Jews. And guess what? After all this pressure with the Syrian government, the Syrian government finally buckled down and they made a deal through the American administration at the time, and of course with the Israelis under the table, Madrid talks. We received a fax on the Shavi'i Shel Pesach. I don't know if you believe if this is a coincidence or not. It was the Shavi'i Shel Pesach in 1991, where Alice Harari saw me in the synagogue and she said, we just got a fax from the American embassy. The Syrian government sent Secret Service to all the shuls announcing a new declaration from the presidential office to all the Jews who would like to leave can apply for passports and leave. I could not believe it. It's unbelievable. On the day Shavi'i Shel Pesach, the same day that Jews left Egypt, thousands of years ago, the Jews of Syria had gone through the same experience with another exodus from a terrible situation.
How many Jews got out at that time?
Well, the deal was no mass exit. That was the deal we made with the Syrian government. They can leave, but they have to leave on over time. All the Jews came out over a period of 2 years.
So it was like every week a couple of Jews would leave.
Every week we used to receive hundreds of people on different airplanes in Kennedy Airport. It took maybe every week, every other week, there were like Lufthansa flights, 50 Jews, 60 Jews, and there were committees meeting them. The Syrian community was also extremely important from the very beginning in all kinds of support for CRSJ, and more so after the Jews have come to the United States, and they helped.
But they needed jobs. They needed
family? Homes to live in. They needed schools for their kids. They needed many things, from a carton of milk to a to a doctor. It's a monumental work, and all was done.
Wow. Wow, Benny, this is really something. So I don't know if you have more slides that you want to show us, or
I want to show you what Jewry looks like today.
Oh,
sad, boy. Really sad. 2 rockets fell on the synagogue, destroyed it completely. As you can tell also that even the marbles on the floor was stripped and stolen. And this is one Jew who visited there.
He's like the last Jew in Syria, or
he was a visitor after. I don't know how he got there, and he took a picture.
Wow. Benny, they want to know how and when your family got out.
My family came out in 1992 with the rest of the Jews, and they all came out together. And I was in my third year in medical school. I had to stop. I took off 1 year, and then to help settle them and look after my family. That was 1992.
And tell us a little bit. There's a whole host of things. I'm looking at people are saying there's someone who was in the Potomac Minyan who left Damascus at 16 and went to Einstein and NYU and NIH and works in pulmonary oncology. Like this, now we're doing Jewish geography. Do you know who that is, or is that a friend of yours? Or
NIH, yes, of course I know him. Balas, is the last name Balas?
It doesn't. They didn't say. They just threw it in, so it must be. That's something. Anyway, I mean, there's lots of questions. I wanted to go to one question, one area that you didn't talk about, and then I'm going to try to move to some of the questions in the chat. We don't want to keep everyone here all night.
Sure.
What did you do when you got here? Like, how did you came here with $600 in your pocket? How did you make a life for yourself?
Well, as I said, my friend Chaim Salama, who took me in for a few months, and I, as every Jew, next morning you wake up, you go to shul, which I did, and I was a new face, and the community was very welcoming. Achiezer, I went to Achiezer where he davens, and I slowly got to learn from the people. There was an organization which still is Bikur Cholim. Bikur Cholim is an organization in the Syrian community who took a great deal in helping us, and I was one. I volunteered for them a few months later, and they helped me tremendously. And through them, actually, the social worker's name is Esti Herman, who is the one who helped me and introduced me to YU. I did not know anything about YU. All I wanted to know is to go to study medicine. And she told me, well, my father is a rabbi at YU and it's a college, prepare kids for, would you like to go there? I said, great. Jewish school? She said, yes. I said, great. And that's how I started. Bikur Cholim. And community members were very helpful. Ricky Cohen of Conway's was, he owned Conway stores. I don't know if you know them. They are, he helped me a lot. They gave me a job in his stores. I did all kinds of odds and ends jobs. It took me a year to learn any comprehensible English. First year, I did not know any English. So I learned that. And through that time, I was working. I did painter, carpenter, stock boy, warehouse, anything you can imagine I did, and just to help support myself.
There was one fascinating point you had mentioned, Benny, that you learned English through your math class. If I remember correctly, you were a year ahead from the Syrian educational system, and then while you were studying math, was psychology?
In college.
College, yeah, exactly.
In college, although I passed
you knew the math already, you're just applying the language.
Right. It's true. I passed the entry exam into YU. I had to take an English exam. I passed it, but still, I could only comprehend, I don't know, 30-40% of the class. So basically, I learned English backwards from the sciences into English backwards.
Because you already knew the material, and now you're just learning the language.
I knew the material. I did not know how to say it or work it in English. Right.
Wow. Maybe I see there's a bunch of questions. I'm just trying. Some of them I don't know if really is your area about what was it like for Syrian Jews before 1948, or where did the Farhi family go, or where does the Lisbona family live? But I did want to go back a little bit to your youth in Damascus. If you're a Jew in Damascus when you're growing up, like what were the foods like? What was What was the Shabbat like? What were smachot like? How did people get married, by the way? Like, how did they arrange marriages? Like, I'm just curious how the community was organized.
I mean, as you can imagine, for example, marriage, everybody knew everybody. It was a small, close-knit community. And it's a semi-arranged, but yes, many situations with arranged marriages, according to, from a Jewish
the kids
perspective.
Must have known each other. They probably knew each other their whole lives.
Of course, they saw each other in the streets, in the synagogues, in smachot, of course. We had, traditional Jewish weddings, halachic weddings, as you can tell. Most of the smachot were done in homes. Until the late 1990s or late 80s, people did not go to a hall to do a wedding. The ceremony was in the main synagogue, and the family and friends and invitees, they came to the home, whatever home it is, usually a big enough place. And the women of both families, they prepared all the food. It was like a real ancient wedding.
It was old-fashioned.
Old-fashioned. Same thing, Brit Milah was in the house. Same thing, Bar Mitzvah was in the house. Yeah.
And were there foods, like, what are the things you remember from your childhood, either good or bad, that really stick in your mind?
Yes. I spoke a lot about this memory, and I'll tell you. For example, we did not have a lot of kosher products that we have here in the United States. In my own home, we had to make our own cheese. I know how to make cheese. We made our own wine in the house. So Pesach, for example, was a whole preparation. The day after Purim finished, the preparation of Pesach started. The preparation not only to buy the raw material and prepare them, but the entire house came down and back up, including repainting the house.
Wow.
The tapestry and the covers for the furniture, like all the fancy stuff, came out in the holidays, special holiday stuff.
You had a separate cover for the furniture on Pesach.
Absolutely. It's a holiday. The entire house was repainted. All the kosher stuff came out. The wines had to be prepared, taken out, which had been sitting in the cellar since Sukkot.
Oh my God.
And we did Hag'ala for the stuff that we couldn't buy. Many people could not buy double, triple utensils. Yeah. So it took literally a month to get to Pesach.
Did the community bake matzah, or did you bake the matzah yourself?
So the matzah was done on a communal level. They rented inside the Jewish quarter. There was one of the public place bakery. They rented that place 2 months before Pesach. They had already bought the kemach from before, and they had there was a shomer on the kemach from the time they harvest it to the time they bring it in to be made for was under shomer supervision. They rented the place, the bakery, and they cleaned it out, made it kasher for Pesach. There was a rabbi there, and they had the workers along by hand, rolling by hands, like most of the Hasidim do that here. And they made for the entire community. For 2 months, you bought whatever you needed. Of course, at subsidized price, because many of the people were not so well to do. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, I have to tell you, and people now go on Pesach programs. They're missing out painting their house.
It's a whole different
experience. But you certainly never would forget Pesach that way.
No.
There's some interesting questions about your relationships with non-Jews. Did you know non-Jewish kids?
Yes.
Was your pressure to convert to Islam?
No.
But you knew non-Jewish kids, and you like they were people that you had relationships with.
I was sitting next to them in the classrooms in the high school. 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, I spent with Christians, with Muslims, with, some
And did
were
they treat
nice.
you as friends, or?
Some were nice to us, like regular kids. Some were not so nice, openly anti-Semite. But if you ask any Jew, at the end of the day, when the situation got out of a little hand, a little strife, the first thing that comes out of their mouth, start cursing the Jews, and so forth. And
you didn't bring them to your house ever?
we did. They came to my house. We never ate in their homes, but they ate in our homes.
You would be friends with them. You would study with them, or whatever.
Yes.
So Benny, post Pesach, did you experience a Nobe?
A Nobe. I grew up in a family of musicians. My uncle Ezra was the principal of the Jewish school, but he's a violinist, professional violinist. We had our own orchestra at home, and they played, especially in the summertime, every Sunday. They used to get together a 8-piece orchestra, and they would play and practice, and we performed. They performed concerts for the Jewish community. Of course, volunteering on volunteering basis. We even had a choral, like 60 kids, 30 boys and 30 girls who were trained to perform alongside the Hazan in a professional way, weddings. And my uncle established that. So I grew up with this music and knowledge of music, and he encouraged us, my uncle encouraged and taught us. So yes, we did have that.
And so you had a lot of concerts. So was music a very big part of like the communal life?
Unfortunately, not big enough, because life, as you might imagine, was very serious. From a Jewish perspective and from simple Syrian citizen perspective, it was tough. Most people were, lower middle class or even in poverty. Like the case in my family, we're very, very modest. My father was the breadwinner of 10 kids. My mom was at home. It's very tough, and I'm very proud to be, of what they did for us. Both my parents sacrificed tremendously for all of us to be where we are today.
So I heard many stories talking about the topic of Jews and non-Jews. That's actually why I brought up the Nobe. So I've heard that the Arabs would bring food to the Jews post Pesach was one of the things that I heard. I've also heard of other very positive Jew and Arab interactions. I hear stories about from my great grandfather used to watch each other's store, playing music together.
That's true. The presence of Jews in Syria dates back thousands of years. For the non-Jews to see Jews in Syria, it's not a strange thing. They are used to us. They deal with us. They work with us. And from what I heard from my grandfather's stories, or sometimes from other people's stories, that sometimes a Jew and non-Jew are partners in business. So the common person on the street is not really, an anti-Semite by nature. Because Syria is more of a secular country, not a religious fanatic Muslim country.
Right. Are there any Jews still there now?
There are a few individuals still there. The brother of my best friend is still there.
How old? A young guy?
No, he's not. He's got to be in his early 50s, 52.
Oh, that's pretty young, and he's still staying there. He didn't want to leave.
He didn't want to leave for his, financial reasons. They still have properties. Mind you, all the Jews who came out of Syria in the 1992-93 have left almost most of their wealth and possession, most of it behind. They had to leave it. many people lost a lot of possessions, and they had to restart again from zero here in the United States.
Wow. Wow. Rabbi Leonardo, I don't know if you have another question I'm going to ask. Otherwise, if Rabbi Leonardo, you have something you want to say, or any question?
There are some very interesting questions that came in. I think each one is a topic unto itself.
Yeah.
Just to lay them out, you don't have to delve into them, but just so everybody sees, I don't know if everybody sees all the questions, but questions such as what was a funeral like? What was Shiva homes like? What were the customs around that? Questions such as when did surveillance begin, right? When was it more open and comfortable in Syria? And when did it become more oppressive? What did that kind of feel like? And also, there were some questions around the Alliance, right? So the Alliance came in, very secular. Was that opposed? Was that welcomed? What were the thoughts after that? What were the philosophical differences between the Alliance school and the Maimonides school that you went to? So we got a lot of questions throughout this.
The Alliance school you're referring to that was established by the French mandate in 1920s did not operate for a long time, and they simply because the Syrians took their country back with a lot of wars. It didn't last. The French influence did not last very much in Syria. During its time, there was the reaction, from what I've heard, was split in the communities. People were pro, and some people were against. The people who were against usually were afraid of the non-religious influence and the secular thoughts that Alliance brought with it. Nonetheless, the school was opened. My grandmother went to the Alliance school, and some other people who went also, and they learned French culture, French language to some extent. But we did not have the school for a long time. I can tell you the school was taken over in the 40s. Yes, in the 40s by the government, obviously, and given to the Palestinian refugees who came from Israel. They gave it to them, and they operated the school.
Wow, Benny, I think we could go all night. I'm going to ask you if you have any final thoughts, and then we're going to close here. We can do this again. I think this was, I'm just looking at the comments I'm getting all over the place, and people are really appreciating that you're opening a door to really a history that many people don't know about, certainly in the Ashkenazi community. And I think even in Rabbi Leonardo, I think even in your minyan, not everybody really knows this about you or knows this about what it was like in Damascus. So I just want to know if you have a final thought that you may want to share with everyone.
The final thought is, I would say this. In Syria, I did not know of this wide Jewish world. I knew nothing about it. All I knew was either you're Jewish or non-Jewish. Orthodox, Ashkenaz, Reform, Conservative, I had no idea. My first experience really feeling a true Jew that belongs, other than being, part of a community, in the bigger sense, was through CRSJ. When I saw the entire Jewish world really stood one hand, trying to help other Jews. The second time I felt this unity and this proud moment that I cherish and value is being part of the KJ community. I think this is a wonderful and an unbelievable message to the entire Jewish world that KJ has to even, we have to speak about this. We have to show this. This is what we're supposed to do. We're not supposed to focus on our differences. We are one nation, Bnei Ish Ehad Anahnu, and we should focus on our common values. And that message could not be stronger coming out every single day from KJ community as it's like a one nation, no difference. It doesn't matter who you are as long as you are Jewish. And that is a message that the entire Jewish world needs to hear today more than ever.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Benny. I know that I've already gotten several requests for a part 2. So stay tuned. In January, we will have a lot more to talk about. And Bezrat Hashem, we will do again. And I think I'm booked until January, but in January, Bezrat Hashem, Benny, we're going to come back. We're going to do a lot more.
Thank you.
Benny. Next time you want some singing.
That next time, right? Someone said we have to sing next time. And you know what? I have to get the Chazan and you. I should have gotten both of you singing. Next time we're going to do some singing. We're going to do a lot of other things. There's so much more to do. And Bezrat Hashem, we're all coming back in January. We're going to do a part 2 in January. I think it's going to be beautiful. Benny, thank you. Not just for being here this evening, but for really inspiring us each and every Shabbat with your tefillot and inspiring us each and every day by the life that you live. Thank you so, so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Rabbi Laniado. And we'll see you soon.
And Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom to all participants.